And we are live.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations. We have two orders of business today. First, we will hear from the Office of Legislative Audits about their Maryland Transportation Authority audit that was released earlier this year. And then we'll have the Maryland Department of Transportation budget overview with DLS and, of course, the department as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Gregory Hook, the legislative auditor. I'll let him introduce the appropriate folks on his team. But thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the subcommittee. I'm Greg Hook, the legislative auditor. And after some introductory comments, I will turn the presentation over to Matt Street, Assistant Audit Director, and Ray Burton, Audit Manager. This audit report, which we're going to talk about today, is the Maryland Transportation Authority, and it was presented at the JAEC, or the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee's December 2021 meeting. And I mention that because today I want to refocus my introductory comments from that meeting to other but related matters. Consequently, with the committee's indulgence, I will limit my opening remarks to my current Easy Pass story rather than speak about the report finding, which I will leave to Matt and Ray. With our office's new location at Camden Yards, I find myself regularly using the Fort McHenry Tunnel, which results in my frequent Easy Pass use. Based on my recent experience, which does not approach the magnitude noted by many customers in recent news reports, something is just not right. I have experienced weeks delays in transaction postings, both auto replenishment and tolls, to my online account, been subjected to video tolling in the afternoon when in the morning commute the transponder was detected. And by the way, I did not move my transponder from placement near my rearview mirror between commutes. And when I called to find out why my commuter plan was not activated timely, I experienced long wait times and was 111th in line for a chat, which from my past Easy Pass customer service experience, I know to be well over an hour. To top it off, last week I received my snail mail, my August 5th to October 4th activity statement, which was dated January 16th, 2022. In a TV newscast on January 19th, 2022, in which Senator McCray related his own tolling issues, the response from the governor's administration was that it had not seen a widespread problem with MDTA tolling issues and customer service concerns. To that, I would reply, you may not see a problem if you do not look for it. In response to our first audit finding about the impact of certain issues with electronic toll collection system and MDTA's efforts to identify and correct related customer overbillings, the Department of Transportation included a statistic about the relative rarity of tolling errors. From my perspective, I consider inconsistencies in transponder pickup, as I experienced, to be a tolling error. I consider non-current account maintenance to be an error. I consider delayed response to customer inquiries, if not an error, to be poor business practice. I'd like to thank you for your forbearance and apologies to MDOT for not sharing my experiences with them prior to this hearing. OLA does have a protocol in place when citizens contact our fraud, waste, and abuse hotline with their Easy Pass problems, which we forward to MDTA management for possible resolution. I did not deem it appropriate as legislative auditor to use that process instead of the regular customer resolution processes. At the December JAEC hearing, I suggested that MDTA or MDOT might want to establish an ombudsman position with sufficient authority to investigate and resolve customer issues with toll errors and the adequacy of the service center's activities, which was met with a lukewarm response by MDTA. I still believe that is a reasonable step worth pursuing, but I now wonder if that may not be enough. With that, I will turn it over to Matt and Ray to present our findings from the MDTA audit report.
Good afternoon. My name is Ray Burton, and I was the audit manager for the Maryland Transportation Authority audit. Please turn to page 2 of your handout. MDTA is responsible for the operation and maintenance of the state's tolling facilities. Our September 2021 report covered MDTA's activities from May 2016 to March 2020 and included 2 report findings. If you would turn to page 3. During the audit period, customers pay tolls at the state's 9 toll collection facilities via cash at toll booths, electronically through EasyPass, or through video tolling billing notices. MDTA also operated 12 walk-in customer service centers at toll and other MVA facilities in Maryland. Walk-in centers are managed and operated by MDTA employees and handle EasyPass balance replenishments, EasyPass applications, and payments for video tolls or penalties owed. In addition, there was one customer service call center operated by the tolling vendor. The call center handles telephone complaints and processes telephone credit card payments. It also processes EasyPass applications and payments on tolls due received through the mail. During our fieldwork, MDTA operations were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic health crisis. For example, effective March 2020, a governor's executive order resulted in MDTA temporarily ceasing the collection of the cash tolls, with this change becoming permanent effective August 2020. MDTA also temporarily closed its customer service centers and suspended the issuance of video toll notifications and related collection efforts from March 2020 to October 2020. In February 2018, the Board of Public Works approved 2 separate contracts totaling $359.4 million to replace MDTA's existing contractor that had provided both the toll collection system, including toll facility hardware and software, and the customer service center, including related software and to process toll transactions. The transition to the new toll collection system contractor began in May 2019, which involved installing new tolling system equipment and software. Although the installation of the equipment and software was completed in July 2020, as of December 31st, 2020, MDTA was still in the process of testing and calibrating the toll collection system. The new customer service center contractor was still in the development and testing phase of its system. Therefore, in order to maintain continuity of services, MDTA obtained Board of Public Works approval in January 2021 to extend the contract of the previous tolling contractor until March 2022 at a cost of $38 million. We received allegations on our fraud, waste, and abuse hotline alleging that MDTA was not taking sufficient action to detect and address the overbilling of customers for electronic tolling errors due to issues with this new toll equipment. We reviewed MDTA's procedures for monitoring its electronic tolling system implementation and the actions taken to address any deficiencies it had identified. If you would please turn to page 4. You can see here from the table provided, MDTA collected toll revenues during fiscal year 2020 at the state's 9 toll collection facilities, totaling $584.6 million. Turning to page 5, we will now discuss toll collections finding 1. We found that MDTA did not sufficiently determine the impact of certain issues with this toll collection system on its customers and identify and correct related customer overbillings. MDTA began transitioning to the new electronic tolling contractor in a series of scheduled facility upgrades from approximately May 2019 to July 2020. MDTA became aware of issues with this new system implementation through observations of toll transactions and customer complaints. For example, according to MDTA records, during the period from December 2019 to October 2020, it documented certain incidents of tolling errors resulting from problems with tolling equipment at 4 facilities. The 4 facilities were the Fort McHenry Tunnel, the Inter-County Connector, I-95 Express toll lanes, and the Thomas J. Hayden Memorial Bridge. Our review also disclosed an issue at the Francis Scott Key Bridge and Fort McHenry Tunnel that MDTA had not previously documented. Although MDTA worked with its vendor to investigate and correct tolling equipment errors during the implementation, it did not always ensure all customers were refunded for any overbilling. Turn to page 6, please. MDTA conducted limited investigations of the impact of tolling equipment malfunctions on its customers for certain days and at certain facilities, and therefore did not determine the full extent of the customer affected or ensure all customers received a refund for amounts overbilled. Specifically, for Fort McHenry, in December 2019, MDTA conducted an investigation of a tolling equipment malfunction that resulted in incorrect axle counts, causing customer overbillings. That is, 2 axle vehicles being charged for additional axles. Although MDTA documented it had fixed the tolling equipment, there was no evidence it had researched the impact of the problem on customers. After we brought our concern about the impact on customers to MDTA's attention in April 2021, it further investigated the issue and identified 7,700 customers who were overbilled a total of $84,400. For the intercounty connector, from April 2020 to August 2020, there were issues with the equipment, such as camera cables, that resulted in vehicle misreads, which could have caused incorrect toll charges or overbillings. A similar situation was noted for the I-95 express lanes during October 2020. While MDTA could document that the equipment issues were fixed, there was no evidence it had determined the extent of customer overbillings. For the Thomas J. Hayden Memorial Bridge, MDTA identified an equipment issue resulting in the miscounting of axles at the Hayden Bridge. In this instance, MDTA proactively performed a review of customer transactions between October 2019 and November 2019 and identified 5,646 transactions for 2 axle vehicles that may have been overbilled. MDTA managed and advised the related customer accounts were credited a total of $67,000. For the Francis Scott Key Bridge, we identified equipment issues here and at Fort McHenry Tunnel that MDTA was not previously aware of. Specifically, customers were billed twice on certain dates in April and May 2020 due to cameras misreading vehicles in other toll lanes. For example, customers were correctly charged for a 2-axle vehicle for $3 and were then incorrectly charged again for a 5-axle vehicle for $24 1 second later. Upon us bringing the issue to MDTA's attention, it performed limited research, 2 separate 24-hour periods at each facility, and confirmed that some customers were overbilled, but it did not conduct further research, such as review other time periods, to determine the full amount of the overbillings. The total potential overbilling related to all of these issues could not be quantified due to the lack of available data. Please turn to page 7, and we'll move on to system access, which is finding number 2. MDTA did not perform periodic documented reviews of system access capabilities granted to employees on the tolling and customer service systems. Customers are assessed and billed for tolls by the system through its EasyPass and video toll applications, which is also used to collect tolls and maintain electronic accounts receivable records. According to available system records, as of July 2020, there were 296 active users that had access to the old system, and the new systems had not yet been fully implemented. We could not readily determine the propriety of the system access because MDTA could not provide us with a detailed system report of user capabilities. For example, MDTA provided us with a report that identified 121 users that had the ability to dismiss a toll violation, but MDTA could not confirm whether this capability was subject to appropriate supervisory review and approval. The State of Maryland Information Technology Security Manual requires agencies to perform system access reviews at least annually. Finally, please turn to page 8 for our conclusions. MDTA should review and evaluate significant tolling issues, such as an increase in similar customer complaints or a pattern of tolling abnormalities. For example, MDTA may want to consider developing a formal policy to review and evaluate tolling issues and determine the extent of customer overbillings for appropriate corrective actions, such as making restitution. MDTA should also review previously identified electronic toll issues to determine the extent of customer overbillings and, in consultation with legal counsel, assess the practicality of related customer restitution. And finally, MDTA should perform periodic documented reviews of user access to its electronic billing and customer service system, including the new systems once implemented, and take appropriate corrective action for any improper or unnecessary user access. This concludes my presentation. I would like to thank you for your interest in this report and ask if you have any questions.
$100 a year.
I do have a question to start. If my colleagues have questions, please use the raise hand function on the bottom of your screen. My question is, it used to be that agencies got audited every 3 years. We made that more flexible, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So do you have a sense of when you might be auditing MDTA again? Because there are some pretty significant issues here. And not only did you discover pretty significant issues, I have to say the rhetoric we've heard from MDTA, at least in the news stories I've read, has been, as Mr. Hook said, which is move along, nothing to see here. So I'm curious if you know when you all will be taking another look at MDTA.
Basically, we audit MDTA about every 4 years. We audit about 20 agencies more frequently, Medicaid, University of Maryland, College Park, some of the bigger agencies. But there's been some talk internally within our office about going back in and doing potentially a limited performance audit, because something, like I said, something's just not right. And I received an email request from a delegate, not Delegate Carr, several days ago. And he characterized it as an ongoing easy pass mess, systemic issues with video tolling. And honestly, there's something out there, and I would really appreciate the department at least accepting the fact that there are problems. I mean, I talked to several of my staff right before this meeting, and we all look back at our statements today or our online accounts, they're all out of date. I mean, it's just my most recent transaction is January 6th. It says in my commuter plan, I've used two different tunnel uses since January 6th. I used at least 8 last week. I don't know where they're getting billed. They're getting billed to my regular account or to my plan. It's like me going to my credit card company and not seeing any transactions posted for 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, it's absurd. And I mean, we are thinking about going in more frequently, definitely, the MDTA. I'm 60 some years old. When I was growing up, no one liked to go to the Motor Vehicle Administration. Nowadays, MVA, at least from my perspective, is a breeze. Everything's online, everything works. I mean, MDTA is starting to take on the taint of what MVA used to be when I was 20 years old. But we are thinking about going back in more frequently. There's something there.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they're dealing with a technological transition that's pretty significant. And of course, they had COVID to deal with. But it is strange how many of our constituents are reporting these issues. It's also good to know that Delegate Carr's brand is strong outside the legislature as well when it comes to questions about MDTA. Other questions from my colleagues? Okay, I think with that, we can turn it to Secretary reports. And I believe he has Executive Director Pines with him as well. And we've congratulated Secretary Ports, I believe, at our subcommittee meetings previously, but this is also a great opportunity to congratulate Executive Director Pines on his new role with MDTA. So, Mr. Secretary, I think we'll start with you if you have any comments before we turn to MDTA.
Sure. I'd like to, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary MDOT. And MDOT takes all audits very seriously, especially legislative audits, and appreciate the work of the auditors, but I'm not seen something like this occur before, but be more than happy to look into Mr. Hook's allegations. When he says he went 8 times last week, it's because they're about a 2-week lag period. So of course he didn't get them this week. That's an easy one to figure out. But you'll be interested to know that the MDTA provided a detailed response in full on December 1st, which, by the way, I couldn't think of a better way to spend my birthday than to go in front of the joint hearing, House and Senate. And the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee meeting, we addressed these findings contained in the Office of Legislative Audits report from September 13th. Since we had this hearing and we went through all this information, it is live streamed. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the House and Senate committee live streams them. And I would encourage your people and either elected officials or folks out there listening to this today to go look at that live stream and the answers that we provided to the auditors, because what I'm hearing today is a lot different than what we heard during that live stream. And so I would encourage people to look at that full hearing between the House and Senate committee. And instead of taking a lot of time to rehash that entire joint House Senate committee evaluation, which is the normal operation of how this works, instead I'll just offer the following high-level recap of the highlights.
Yeah, so Mr. Secretary, let me just stop you right there for 1 second, just because I want to be clear about something.
Sure.
This subcommittee certainly has jurisdiction over audits involving MDOT and its units. And this is not unusual. Over my time serving on the subcommittee, we've had several briefings about audits. The full committee also often takes up audits, even if they've also gone to the joint committee. So appreciate the feedback about legislative procedure, but this is pretty well within the norm for our activities. But with that, please go ahead and continue.
The only thing I would say differently about that is that normally an audit that's done on one of the agencies or a TBU, Transportation Business Unit, would be done during that budget hearing, not an overall budget hearing, but that's okay. We can differ on that. But in the submission letter that Mr. Hook stated, he said in each case, once aware of the issue, and I'm quoting, by the way, it does appear that MDTA did take timely action to resolve the toll equipment or software deficiencies responsible for the problems. That's right in that audit. And so they did give us credit for fixing these potential problems. And we are dealing with mechanical devices and optical devices also. And so the MDTA identified the issues, acted swiftly to remedy and identify them, and have put into place standard operating procedures to further insurance compliance and consistency. Secondly, we totally agree with the auditors that the audit procedures were not statistically based, and therefore the conclusions could not be drawn about MDTA's tolling accuracy. In contrast, MDTA's statistical quality program verified over 99.8% accuracy for the 150 million transactions that we process on average every year with an extremely low error rate. As a matter of fact, it's consistent with and I'll say this, 0.00065 error rate found in the audit report example. I don't even know how you measure that. I know if I was in a swim match, they'd have to do it electronically because there's no way a human could figure out how quickly that is and how low of a number that is. So third, due to the audit, some customers have spoken out believing that they've been overcharged when in actuality, the toll rate charge is correct. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of reports out there that has helped create that perception that we're overcharging the customers, but that's not the case. I can tell you I received a call from an elected official today. A gentleman received, I think, 68 toll notices and swore that we did something wrong and that our accuracy was incorrect. Come to find out, when we looked into the gentleman's case, he had not updated his credit card. His credit card was out of date since 2010. And we are working with that customer to update his information because he thought he had an account, but because it was so outdated with his credit card that was out of date, he did not have an account anymore and got video told. He thought that it was inaccuracy on our part. We found out that it was basically because the credit card was not updated. And we're working with the customer, and we'll make it right, and we'll work together with him to get his account up to date and up to snuff. That's not a problem, but it's just one of those examples I can give. As was mentioned earlier, the MDTA is proud of its extremely high quality equipment and accuracy tolling. We also don't want any of our customers, whether they're Easy Pass, pay by plate, or video toll, paying higher rates than they should have. That's why, one, Governor Hogan has reduced the toll rate several times, has reduced the cost for the transmitter. Matter of fact, took it from $9 to $0. We give them away free now. You can't beat that cost. And we also continue to message on all available platforms on how paying video tolls early, you can receive a 15% discount. And of course, we encourage everybody to get the highest discount of an Easy Pass Maryland account, which is up to 77% discount. I don't know who goes out of their way in business to try and give people a 77% discount, but the Hogan administration does it each and every day, trying to get our customers to stop paying the $6 payment, stop paying the previous cash amount, and start paying the discounted Easy Pass rate. Despite these strong communication efforts, however, before the following Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee meeting, we continue to see allegations from customers about overcharges that actually stem from other issues like one I just mentioned, credit card expirations, transponders not properly mounted, and the accounts going inactive from insufficient funds. Finally, each of the items detailed in the audit have been addressed. Customers were provided the refunds. Standard operating procedures are in place to remedy each of the issues that were addressed in the audit. And if there's further interest by members of this committee, we'll be happy to send each of your offices the link to the video of that meeting. With that, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for allowing me to share with everyone that the MDTA vendors have a very low error rate, as I mentioned, 0.000065, or said differently, a very high accuracy rate. I would also want to thank you for allowing me to share that the MDTA took action and resolved the software deficiencies, as was mentioned in the audit. And thirdly, that the impacted customers were reimbursed. So I want to thank you for allowing us to share that with everyone watching.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Did Mr. Pines need to say anything, or does that cover the departments? Mr. Secretary.
I'm sorry. You were like muted for the first part of that sentence, so I didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I was asking if Mr. Pines needed to say anything, or if that was going to cover it for the department and MDTA.
I think we're okay, except for the fact that I would say, to Mr. Hook, we did speak prior, and we're more than happy to look into his specific case. We usually do that in person, one-on-one. So I was a little surprised by this, but that's okay. We don't mind that. We don't mind him sharing, and if he allows to come after we go through his information, maybe we'll come back and say what happened in his situation.
Yeah, MDTA gets a budget hearing, as you know, so there'll be a great opportunity for that.
Sure.
Do you want to speak, or Mr. Pines want to speak about sort of the call center or volume issues? Because obviously we're all getting a lot of complaints about that, and your team or the MDTA team does a great job responding to legislator requests. Of course, many people don't call their legislators; they try to resolve their own problems. So I don't know if there's any update on how the call center volume is going, but
Sure, I'll kick that to Mr. Pines because he's probably got the more accurate numbers. I do know that the vendor has done a pretty darn good job of trying to increase the amount of people that we have in the call centers. However, they suffer from the same problems that everybody else is suffering from with COVID and their employees getting COVID, and then of course being near other people with COVID, and so they have been struggling with numbers. But I'll kick that to Will Pines to give you an update on that. Will, you available there?
Yeah. Sure. Yes, Jim. And thank you, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Again, my name is Will Pines, for the record, and I'm the acting executive director for the Maryland Transportation Authority. So I do have updated call center stats for the month of January. Our average call wait time has fallen to 65 minutes. We are currently receiving an average of 17,000 calls per day to our agents who are receiving calls. We've increased our staff from 163 up to 163 members now, and we have on average 127 reps answering calls each day. We in January, at early January, with the onset of the Omicron virus and the numerous increases in infection rates that all of us have seen throughout the nation, we did have some really significant challenges with folks quarantining, and the original contract did not contemplate the need for remote working like what many of us are experiencing now, and like the virtual meeting we're doing today. Since that time, we've worked with the vendor to help them manage quarantining cases more effectively, and they now have 36 employees who are set up to be able to do that remote work for these kinds of instances that occur. And so I just, to help make sure that the record is clear on what the actual incidents are and why our call center volume is high, to be sure it's directly related to the pause in mailings of notices of toll due for customers who do not have an Easy Pass. That's the primary factor. Mr. Hook noted his anecdotal experience, which was not the subject of the audit. And I appreciate his acknowledgement that he didn't share that with us. I want to thank the auditors for their work, but make sure that that work's not confused with the reason that we're actually getting calls in the first place. So let's talk for a second about why are we getting these calls, what the actual concerns are. Beginning in March of 2000, in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency, the MDTA implemented several temporary measures to assist customers during the pandemic. We initiated statewide all electronic tolling overnight at MDTA's remaining 5 facilities and charged the video toll cash rate at facilities that had been accepting cash. We established grace periods for Easy Pass discount plan expirations and paused the notices of toll due, like I mentioned before, what we refer to as NOTDs. And that was done to provide financial relief and to protect our customers' employees during the pandemic. The MDTA's decision to pause the mailings of notices of toll due aligned with other COVID-19 financial relief programs like deferred rent, mortgage, and many other programs at the height of the pandemic. We knew that many customers and businesses were facing significant financial strains. And during the time of the pause between March of 2020 through October 2020, video toll mailings were paused. And as a result, a backlog of tolls from that period accrued that we are actively in the process of resolving. And we all remember statements like 2 weeks to stop the spread. And certainly no one at the MDTA ever imagined at the time of the pause that pause would last as long as it did. Now, where we are today, we anticipate that the backlog will be cleared later this year. Now, while the decision to pause mailings has resulted in numerous customer challenges and alleging that delayed toll posting is an error, that's just not correct. Mr. Hook kind of asserted that by having a backlog, that's somehow an error. And just want to make sure that everybody understands that the blending of challenges that we're facing from the backlog and with the findings of this audit, which demonstrated that we have a very low error rate, is actually resulting in customer confusion and frustration and is not addressing the actual root cause of the concerns that we're encountering. While we understand that some customers may have opted to pay the deferred tolls in a shorter time frame, it's infeasible for us to do that. And so the pause did apply to all video tolls and including image-based tolls, which kind of leads to why some EasyPass customers are having a bad experience. Those image-based tolls are all part of the backlog. And so we see that customers that have certain problems, either inactive accounts or image-based tolls, those EasyPass customers end up having problems from the backlog as well and having delayed postings like what Mr. Hook had mentioned. We provided an email blast to all EasyPass customers, giving them best practices to follow to receive the lowest tolls on their accounts. And those specifically are to make sure that they maintain an accurate listing of all of their vehicles. This can particularly be an issue when customers get new vehicles and do not update the license plates on their accounts. Keeping billing information up to date, and also particularly in checking for expired credit cards, is a major issue where once a card goes expired, like the example that Jim mentioned, their customer becomes inactive. They generate video tolls. Those video tolls were tied up in the backlog. And now EasyPass customers are finding out they had an expired card and video tolls. It's also necessary for customers to maintain a positive balance on their accounts consistent with the terms and conditions of EasyPass. This is a primary issue if an EasyPass customer elects not to use auto replenishment and does not replenish their account before incurring tolls. The account goes into an invalid, inactive status. And when this occurs, they also generate video tolls and then fall subject to the issues that we're facing with the backlog. Finally, and a really big one, we put out a video on this to kind of explain it in more detail. Many customers have what's called image tolls or eye tolls. Again, those tolls went into the backlog. And they primarily occur when a customer does not properly mount their transponder. So the vast majority of the customers that are EasyPass are happily following these best practices and are not having issues. But unfortunately, when the best practices are not followed, customers receive eye tolls or their account goes negative, and they end up in these cases associated with the backlog that are the reason that we're hearing the calls. The calls do not have to do with this audit finding, which occur on an extremely limited basis, as Jim noted previously. So I want to thank again the auditors for their hard work, and we absolutely are doing everything we can to comply with the audit. Look forward to working with them in the future, but do want to really make sure that there's absolutely no confusion that the audit findings have nothing to do with the problems that we're actually facing, which is from backlog tolls. Thank you.
Mr. Pines, congratulations again on your new post, and appreciate the calm and detailed explanation of why people are actually calling the call centers instead of sort of blaming the callers. You mentioned the 65-minute wait time. Do you know what the wait time was on average prior to COVID, so prior to the pause? I mean, what are we trying to sort of get back to?
Yeah, so I don't actually have that stat with me, Chairman. I can get that for you and reply. We certainly contractually require much lower wait times. Typically less than 2 minutes is where we're going to strive for. Once this backlog is resolved and we have notice of toll due sort of cleared out, we expect to get much lower call volumes. We have had significant improvements where the call center is being staffed up. We're leveraging remote working. And we've brought in additional call center reps from subcontractors and actually even opened up a new call center office to try to manage this. So the call times have declined significantly at this point, almost by half of what they were at the worst point.
And as we all know, just from our normal lives, not to veer into the anecdotes that seem to be the subject of so much criticism, but a lot of systems now use chatbots or let you hang up and they'll call you back when you're sort of next in the queue. Do you all employ any technology like that at this point, or is it still sort of the old-fashioned, sit on hold, hopefully we're watching Netflix or something, waiting for an agent to pick up?
We have a web chat feature that's responded to by a live person. We do not currently have an AI technology with chatbot. However, we do within our IVR, about half of the calls that we get has an interactive voice response, where most of the calls are actually resolved by that. We are looking into long-term deploying a chatbot type system, but that was not included in the original contract. And certainly when this was procured, that technology has advanced quite a bit since then. And so that's something that we'll look to in the future. But frankly, want to make sure that we're not implementing more changes to the system midstream as we work out the remainder of the backlog.
Sure, thank you. Any questions from my colleagues on the audit issue for MDOT or MBTA? Delegate Kittleman, you don't want to relive your old post? No?
I'm just glad I'm not there right now.
Right. Okay, well, thank you to the Office of Legislative Audits. Obviously, thank you to MDOT and MBTA as well, but Joe will be sticking with us as we turn now to our Maryland Department of Transportation budget overview. I do want to acknowledge that the Vice Chair of the full committee, Vice Chair Chang, is here, and we will now turn it to our budget analyst, Steve McCulloch, to go through the analysis before we hear from the department.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Steve McCulloch, Department of Legislative Services, here to present the MDOT overview. Starting with Exhibit 1, this shows the COVID impact on transportation in Maryland, and it compares the statistics to 2019, the pre-pandemic level. As you can see from this chart, all of the travel in all modes really dipped at the beginning of the pandemic and then have generally increased and improved since that time. However, MTA services and BWI traffic are still well below pre-pandemic levels. Truck traffic particularly has improved and exceeded 2019 levels. That is largely due to the change in behavior with during the pandemic, people ordering more stuff for delivery to their homes. That's driving the truck traffic. Regular weekly traffic has approached pre-pandemic levels, but generally is skirting it, except for spikes for holidays below the level of the 2019 service. That translates through to the Transportation Trust Fund forecast. This exhibit shows the January 22 6-year forecast that just came out, compares it with the first column is the January 2021. And in both cases, the change column shows the difference between those forecasts and the pre-pandemic January 2020 forecasts. And so this really does show, for example, just looking at total revenues. Last year, we were looking at $1.6 billion decrease from the January 2020 level. Comparing the January 2022, we're now in positive territory with $505 million increase relative to 2020 forecast. However, as you can see here, the improvement has not been uniform. Motor fuel taxes are still down slightly. Corporate income tax and titling taxes are doing well. And then on the operating revenue side, this big decrease in operating revenue is still the ongoing, reduced transit driving that. On the expenditure side, operating budget spending is down. This is largely due to the deferment of Purple Line availability payments that had been scheduled earlier in the forecast in last year's. With the resolution of the Purple Line contract, we now are seeing the schedule adjusted, and that pushes AP payments out to the end of the forecast. This is just Exhibit 3 is just the closeout for 2021. 2021 closed out with a balance $275 million greater than expected. A lot of that is due to increased federal stimulus funding than had been anticipated going into the year. Exhibit 4 shows the trust fund sources, and you can see that the three largest sources for trust fund revenues are the motor fuel tax, titling tax, and federal capital funding. The third largest state source is the registration fee. This is the 5-year, 6-year forecast for the Transportation Trust Fund. It includes the current year and then 5 out years. Just note things to note: the closing fund balance is much higher than it's been, including the target ending balance in the out years. That's largely due to, again, the federal stimulus funding coming in and MDOT's plan to spread that out through 2024, which accounts for those elevated levels. But even following that, MDOT has on occasion increased its target closing balance in order to provide sufficient working, cash by the end of the year to manage the operating and the capital programs. Bond proceeds I've highlighted here just to note that in 2023, MDOT does not expect to issue any bonds in support of the capital program, and total 6-year issuances are expected at $1.7 billion. Over the whole forecast period, debt service coverage ratios are above the minimum, although by 2027, they are just above the minimum level that MDOT has adopted as an administrative practice. Exhibit 6 just shows proposed capital funding by source by year. Things to note here: the general fund, there is continued general fund planned use to support the WMATA dedicated capital grant. Special funds, as you can see, by the end of the forecast period are dropping. Couple issues or reasons for that. The special fund used for the capital is propped up by the federal funds that come in on the operating side, thus freeing up the special funds for capital. As those go away, the special funds are going to be used increasingly on the operating side, and capital is the last call on trust fund revenues. The Exhibit 7 just shows the 6-year programmed funding for capital by mode. Comparing it to last year's plan, there's a $2.5 billion increase in the 6-year transportation capital. Exhibit 8 shows the history of capital spending, and then starting in 2022, this is the current year. Those are estimates, but you can see that the big ramp up in capital spending that followed the 2013 increase in the gas tax, increasing use of debt to support the capital program, and then peak spending is actually expected in the current forecast, where in excess of $3 billion capital program for the first time ever in MDOT, but that is expected to dip through the middle of the forecast before increasing slightly towards the end. Exhibit 9 now transitions from a 6-year look at things to focus on fiscal 2023, and this shows the uses of the trust fund for fiscal 2023, and you can see that the capital is almost half of the spending in 2023. Operating budget accounts for another 41%. Exhibit 10 shows basically the detail. These, if you look at 2020 and 2023, you will find these amounts actually in the budget bill and in the governor's budget book. So these are down to the dollar amounts for operating, debt service, capital, state aid, and total funds. Just of note, so on the operating side of things, 2023 is about a $60.2 million increase over the current year. That's 2.7%. Capital is down $400.4 million. That is largely driven by the decrease in the transit administration. And that is caused by the fact that in the current fiscal year, the forward refunding of the private activity bonds for the purple line occurred in 2022. So there's $355 million in 2022 that disappears in 2023 and drives that, in addition to other projects being completed. Overall, total budget for MDOT, all categories, decreases by $300 million or 5.1% from the prior year. Exhibit 11 shows the operating allowance by mode for fiscal 2023. As has been, the trend for many years, transit on the operating side of things is the largest chunk of operating spending. Transit is a very personnel intensive operation. Looking at positions, there are no increases between the current year and the allowance year at the total line for regular or contractual positions. There are a few transfers among units of MDOT. Looking now at highway user revenue grants, the dedicated or mandated capital appropriations for local governments are expected to increase by $10.2 million. This is just a factor that the revenues are increasing, and it's a formula based on the balance in the gasoline motor vehicle revenue account. I will note for highway user revenues, the administration has introduced legislation, that's House Bill 410 and Senate Bill 400, to extend and make permanent the current enhanced level for locals of 13.5% of the motor vehicle revenue account. Under existing law, that enhanced rate have been in effect for 5 years, ending in 2024. So in 2025, that rate is currently scheduled to drop back to 9.6%, which is the level it's been at since about 2010. Exhibit 14 shows capital spending by mode. Transit is 25% and 14% for MTA and WMATA respectively, with state highway being, the second, if you add those two together, the second highest use of capital funds. Exhibit 15 every year shows the other funds that support the capital program. Other funds are generally considered those funds that do not flow through the state budget. However, I've highlighted a couple things that are actually state funds. For the Port Administration, there's $51.5 million in general obligation bonds slated to support the Howard Street Tunnel project. And then scrolling down, excuse me for the scrolling, for the WMATA dedicated capital grant, the $167 million in general fund is also included in the other funds category in the CTP. In total for 2023, over $589 million in other funds supports the capital program. Turning now to the issues. The first issue is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. The Appropriations Committee did receive a briefing on IIJA at a high level. So I'll just, in terms of the overview, just hit a couple points. As everybody has heard by now, IIJA authorizes about $1.2 trillion over 5 years. That is not all new money. $550 billion represents the new money. Maryland is projected to receive about $8.2 billion, of which $6.9 billion comes to transportation. Of that 8.2, about 2.8 billion would be new or enhanced funding. As you can see, for the transportation section, this shows the total 6.9 billion for transportation, and the breakout with highway and bridge funding being the lion's share that comes to Maryland, with public transportation or transit funding being the next largest. Looking now at highways and bridge funding, this is part was not quite covered by the appropriations, so this is kind of new information. The IIJA provides $351 billion for roads and bridges over 5 years, with $110 billion of that representing new funding. There are two pots that support the highway and bridge funding. There's the Highway Trust Fund, Federal Highway Trust Fund, and Exhibit 17 shows the breakout between formula programs and discretionary programs funded through the Highway Trust Fund, and that's largely lion's share going out through formulas to the states. This funding through the IIJA represents about a almost 30% increase in funding over the FAST Act levels. The second pot of money that is funding highway and bridge programs are general funds from the federal government. And this pie shows this breakout between formula and discretionary funding. It's a slightly larger piece for discretionary, but still 3/4 of it is still going out as formulas. Total general funds support for highways and bridges of $47.3 billion. Exhibit 19 shows highway trust fund formula programs totaling $273.2 billion. Just by the, all of these from the FAST Act are continued in the IIJA. There are a slew of new highway programs created through the legislation. And Exhibit 20 shows that. It's 2 pages, and I'm not going to go through one, but I do want to just note that they're there for a brief description of what they are, and the fact that most of this funding, and you can tell by the type column, is discretionary, meaning that the state and local governments will, can apply for this, but it's a competitive program. So there's not a guaranteed amount coming to Maryland from this. For transit under IIJA, national total for transit is $108 billion, of which $39 billion represents new funding. That is comprised of highway trust fund funding plus advanced appropriations, and then there's an additional $17 billion. It's within the 108, but 17 billion of that is subject to congressional action to appropriate. So that's primarily in the capital grants program, but it will take an act of Congress to fully authorize that, for that authorization to actually be realized. Exhibit 21 shows the formula programs under FTA, and the orange bars at the top of each formula program shows the new level under IIJA. The blue bars show the previous funding levels under the FAST Act. So as you can see, it's a nearly 35% increase for the formula programs for transit. There are also competitive grant programs for transit. These are shown on this Exhibit 22. The programs listed in italics are new. There are 4 of them. Total funding, again, competitive. So local localities will have to apply for and be successful in order to access the funding, $36.7 billion. The second issue is the Purple Line, design build replacement contractor, the new cost increases, and the schedule. This committee does have a hearing scheduled for the Purple Line, so I'm not going to go through this issue, but it is there for you to read in advance of the hearing. And I will switch to the third issue, the Managed Lane project, which has been rebranded as Up Lanes Maryland. As you're all aware, the P3 phase developer contract was approved by the Board of Public Works this past summer. SHA and MDTA expect to have proposals for construction of Phase 1 South, which extends from just south of the American Legion Bridge up I-270 to the I-370 interchange. They expect to have those proposals submitted by late spring of this year, and to actually submit to the Board of Public Works by early fall of this year the contract for the construction of that first phase, with public and legislative required 30 days prior to BPW approving or considering approval of that contract. I would also just note that there is a protest that's outstanding. It's made its way through the administrative process for within MDOT and has now been moved on to the Circuit Court for Montgomery County. And then the final issue is an update of an issue from a few years ago. where I looked at the increased funding and how it was spent since the motor fuel tax increase that was passed in 2013. And the methodology was simply to use 2013 as the base year, since that was prior to any new revenues coming in from that tax increase, and then subtracting out that base funding each year by category, you could see where the state special fund spending has occurred. Exhibit 26 shows the spending by category. There's $8.5 billion increased spending since 2013 that has occurred, and 52%, just over half, has been spent on capital, 33% on operating, and debt service and highway user make up the remaining spending. Looking at it just at the operating spending level, similar to what we saw for fiscal 2023, MDTA and WMATA spending on operation accounts for the majority of spending of new money for operations. Since 2014, this new money for operations has totaled $2.8 billion. Exhibit 28 shows the capital side of things and looking at that. And on the capital side, state highway, 68% is the lion's share of new funding from the gas tax, was devoted to highways and bridges, with transit accounting for about 14% and the remaining units for MDOT making up the remaining 18%. Combining operating and capital, SHA still has almost half of the spending, with the transit coming in, the combined WMATA and MTA at about 34% and 19% for the remaining units of MDOT. And then the final exhibit on this issue, because I did this a few years ago where I looked at 2014 to 2019, this graph just compares the spending level for operating and capital, and that's the top line, with the current analysis I just presented, which are the blue lines, and you can see the change in spending patterns since then. SHA combined operating and capital has decreased slightly since a couple of years ago. MTA and especially WMATA have increased more relative to a few years ago. Turning now to the recommended action, there are two annual recommended actions. The first requires notification of changes to the capital program, and the second recommended action establishes a position cap for both regular and contractual positions. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. I see we have a question from Delegate Beitzel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, on Exhibit 26, that shows the total amount of revenue that was raised in the change of the gasoline tax increases and stuff for a whole period from 2013 through, I think, 20, whatever it is. Total was 8.5 billion. Do you have a graph or a chart that bar graph that would show how that revenue stacks up each year from the time it was implemented to what it is now? Is there an increase? As it went down, up and down? It shows the total. Is there any indication of how much additional revenue growth is there in that segment of the revenue?
Yes, I mean, so, this increased spending is the additional above the 2013 base. So there has been growth every year, but I can certainly provide that in table form by year, and then you would see the amount of additional revenue that's been generated by that gas tax increase.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for the analyst? Okay, I think with that, we can turn back to the department. Secretary of Ports, we turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jim Port, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. I also want to give a shout out to Steve. It's always good to see him. Little do you know, Mr. Chairman, I tried to steal him a few years ago. I look at him as being one of the true professionals. I mean, absolute outstanding employee. And like I said, we tried to steal him. He wouldn't come over, but we may still try. I'm
Mr.
just
Secretary, you've already got your CFO from us, so you're.
well, and you know, we can use all the help we can get, Mr. Chairman. It's a big department. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be before you today to discuss the department. And although I've been presenting these for many years in the past, I've not done this as a secretary. As you know, I've been in and around the department for many years, and I want to thank Governor Hogan for giving me the opportunity to serve as secretary at this time. But between MDOT and MDTA, there are over 10,000 employees who have been working hard to continue to provide essential services and excellent customer service throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And over the last 2 years, these employees have demonstrated their dedication, flexibility, resiliency in responding to the ever-changing circumstances that we found ourselves in. These are frontline employees in many cases and are doing an excellent job keeping the state moving forward. You know, Steve discussed some of the operational stats over the last 2 years regarding the usage of transportation system. At the lowest points, the usage in April of 2020, traffic volumes on our roadway were down nearly 60%. Passengers at BWI Marshall Airport were down 95%, and transit ridership was down nearly 80%. Since then, we've seen some improvements in our numbers. As Steve mentioned, traffic on the roadways has pretty much returned to pre-pandemic levels, and truck traffic is actually up nearly 15%. At BWI Marshall Airport, we're still in recovery mode, with passengers down about 25% from pre-pandemic levels. We're seeing a nationwide that airline industry is taking a little longer to recover than the roadway traffic, and we're seeing a much slower recovery in our transit system. As was mentioned, overall ridership is down about 40%, but there's a significant variation among these various transit modes. So, for example, core bus service continued to provide essential transportation throughout the pandemic and did not see as significant of a ridership declines as some of the other modes. Core bus has been steadily increasing, is down about 30%. Our commuter services were impacted much more heavily by the pandemic, mirroring national trends. Ridership on MARC, for example, and commuter buses continue to be down about 75%, and Metro is down 70%. Light rail is doing slightly better, but ridership remains down about 60%. So ridership on MARC and commuter buses is heavily driven by the federal workforce, which I know you're very familiar with personally. And MTA is closely monitoring trends and has restored full service so that we're able to be there when the riders do return. While we're making major investments in existing transit system, we really need to think about what the transit system of the future may look like. A good opportunity for that is through MTA's statewide transit plan. This plan is the first of its kind and includes the entire state and sets a comprehensive vision for transit over the next 50 years. The draft plan is available now on MTA's website, and I encourage you and any others to review it and provide comments. MTA is also making the system faster and more reliable, more accessible, and easier to use through advancing initiatives in the Central Maryland Region Transit Plan. Two corridor feasibility studies are underway now and will be out for public comment later this year. And of course, we can't talk about infrastructure these days without talking about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or as Steve mentioned, the IIJA, also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Steve did a good job of covering all the different programs and pots of money that that bill will provide. And I just want to highlight a couple key points. While it is true that the IIJA provides billions of dollars for transportation in Maryland, it's really critical to note that not all that money is new money. The IIJA includes a 5-year reauthorization of surface transportation programs. Approximately $5 billion of this funding is highway and transit formula funding to continue current funding levels through fiscal year 2026. Don't get me wrong, this is really important to us because it gives us certainty about funding levels over the next several years, but that portion of money is already accounted for in our current CTP. The IIJA also provides additional funding that we have not seen programmed yet and are waiting federal appropriations and guidance for. I'll use Steve's quote, it's going to take an act of Congress to appropriate this. True act of Congress, by the way. These appropriations are currently operating under a continued resolution that expires February 18th. So it's uncertain at this time if Congress will pass the new appropriations bill before that time or pass another continuing resolution. Matter of fact, I'll digress. I did speak with Congressman Steny Hoyer earlier, I guess late last week, and you know, we had talked about the appropriations process, and he said he was going to see what he could do to move that along. Unfortunately, I heard today that he has COVID, so we'll keep him in our prayers and hope that he can pull through with very, very minor outcome, you know, from that. But without those appropriation funding levels, we have to maintain the current levels. We're estimating about 20% more federal formula transportation funding to Maryland over the next 5 years. That's 2022 through 2026. The total highway funding, as was mentioned, is about $4.6 billion. So that's $1 billion more than previous law for highway funding. Total transit funding, $1.7 billion, which is about $300 million more than the previous transit funding, and airport funding of $158 million for airport improvement programs. We also know that there'll be a number of new grant programs, as Steve mentioned, available, and we'll be ready to respond to them as soon as they become available. We expect the US DOT to use these programs to place high emphasis on climate change, equity, and state of good repair. And state of good repair and asset management continues to be a major focus of MDOT. As you know, we use data-driven analytics to make informed decisions about where to invest our dollars. The 6-year capital program that we released last month totals $17.7 billion, our largest capital program ever. The majority of our program is divided between transit and highways, with about 13% going to the port, airport, MVA, and some statewide efforts coordinated through the Secretary's office. Steve did a great job highlighting how the CTP is funded, and I'll just add a couple of notes. The CTP funding includes $500 million in funding provided to MDOT as a result of the funding framework agreed to by the governor and the legislature. Thank you very much for this investment in Maryland's transportation network. We've included in the CTP a list of all the projects that benefited from this additional funding, and federal relief dollars, both the dollars that came through the state as well as those received directly by MDOT, were critical in sustaining the department's operations over the last 2 years. There's been a lot of focus on unprecedented fiscal situation that the state finds itself, with billions of dollars in the bank and a structural surplus for the foreseeable future. It is important to note that MDOT is in a very different position from the state right now. Steve's chart on page 5 of the DLS analysis showed that MDOT's revenue forecast today is up $500 million from our forecast pre-pandemic. But when you take out the nearly $900 million of federal relief funds in this forecast, many of MDOT's revenue sources are still down considerably from where they were pre-pandemic. Our largest source of revenue is a motor fuel tax, and it is still not fully recovered from the pandemic. Yeah, I spoke earlier about the slower recovery, and that we're seeing in the transit and airport passenger areas. Over the next 6 years, our forecast for operating revenue is down more than $500 million as a result. We talked about IIJA, which will help offset the revenue loss, but a lot of those IIJA funds will also have requirements for state matching funds. That means we will have to continue to be very strategic about how we are investing our dollars. I mentioned that the DLS analysis a couple of times already. I'd like to thank again our DLS analyst, Steve McCulloch, for identifying and discussing a couple of key issues the department is facing now. Steve did a great job, as always, on covering these issues, but I just want to spend that time highlighting a few items. The DLS analysis included 2 recommended actions for MDOT, both pieces of annual budget language that the department concurs with. That concludes our remarks, Mr. Chairman, and I have a couple members of the team with me today, and we're happy to address any of the questions that you or your members may have.
Great, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I better thank Steve again too, since now I know that the folks are out looking for him. The headhunters. Colleagues, if you have any questions, please use the raise hand function. Don't worry, I can fill the time while you're thinking of them. Okay, so a few categories of questions, Mr. Secretary, and recognizing this is the overview, if you think any of these would be better fit for subsequent briefings, either the Secretary's office, one or one of the TBUs, let me know. The first is on the infrastructure bill. Obviously, it's dangerous to bet on what Congress is going to do unless you're going to bet on them doing nothing. But if they actually pass their sort of omnibus, full year appropriation bill by February 18th, is it the intention of the department and the administration to come down with supplemental budgets, or what's the sort of plan on the formula funds? Obviously, discretionary grants are very different, but on the formula funds, what's the plan on FY23 programming?
So 2 things. Again, I want to mention it, as you know, and you just mentioned it, it has to be appropriated, right? And then secondly, we need to get the rules or the regulations associated with that funding. So it becomes a little more difficult when we put that piece of the pie into it. So if we had it our way, Mr. Chairman, we would hope that they don't come up with a lot of new rules and regulations that we'd have to follow, because then we're kind of ready to move forward quickly. And I say that because, as you know, you're very familiar with the CTP process that we have, which all the local governments send to us their priorities, and that's what delegation support, both House and Senate, in most cases with the local governments. And so what we like to do is focus on those priorities at the state, statewide impact, regional impact, as well as local impact. And I think it's a good place to start, because many of those projects are in the CTP, many of them are in planning or design. And so that we'd be able to hit the ground running quickly on some of those infrastructure projects. Now, we do know that the federal government usually puts timelines on when you must appropriate that funding. So we have to be cognizant of that. They may spread it out a couple of years. So we may be able to spend a portion this year, a portion next year, and a portion the year after that. Or we may be able to get those projects into work quickly, so that we'll be ready to appropriate it in the out years. So that's kind of the outlook at this point. We're trying to keep it apolitical, if you will, in looking at the priorities of the local governments, as I mentioned, and the regional impact and state impact. So that's our starting point, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that. Obviously, we adopt the sort of current year of the CTP. We'll adopt the FY23 column of the CTP as part of our operating budget. It's sort of incorporated by reference. So I think there's a lot of interest among legislators on knowing what the FY23 sort of changes might be from what's currently in the CTP. Obviously, you will develop the FY24 CTP. I mean, you probably start, in April, but for most of us, we'll see it in September when you release the draft and then kick off your CTP show, what some people call the road show. I guess I'm trying to understand changes to what was submitted a few weeks ago for FY23. If Congress acts when it's supposed to by February 18th, when might we see those changes made clear or proposed?
Yeah, I can't quite answer that without knowing what the rules are that they're going to send down to us. We do have, I guess, a little better idea maybe on some of the bridge money, because I believe that is appropriated. And so we'd have an idea of where actually, let me say it this way. We're doing an assessment to local governments because we do know that some of that funding has to go to the local bridge systems throughout the state. And of course, some of it goes to the state system. So we know what ones are either poor or fair. And there's certain allocations on how much you can spend on the poor bridges and certain allocations that you can spend on the fair bridges. So all those factors come into place as we look towards this. But as you probably heard me say before at the CTP meetings, we just mentioned that we have a $17.7 billion CTP this year, but we have hundreds of billions of dollars in need. So there will never be enough money to spend on all the needs that we have throughout the state. So right now, again, we're going to try and focus on what our current needs are. And before we start thinking about other needs at this point. Now, does that mean that nothing new will come up? No, it doesn't, but I can't tell you what that new item might be without assessing what they're going to give us, what the rules are, and what our current needs are to try and move this money forward.
Yeah, thank you. And since you mentioned bridges, we don't have a Southern Maryland, I don't think we have any Southern Maryland legislators on the Appropriations Committee at this point. So I do want to just flag for you because they're always reminding me, and I was just on it a couple weeks ago about the Thomas Johnson Bridge and the need there. So I just want to flag that for you. Obviously, not one that's in my district or my part of the state, but Southern Maryland always likes to bring that up to me whenever we're talking transportation. So I wanted to flag that for
Congressman
you.
Hoyer flagged that one for me also, as you can imagine. As a matter of fact, Congressman Hoyer said, Jim, I know you're getting all that IIJA money. I'd be glad to have all of it for the Thomas Johnson Bridge. And of course he laughed. And he said, no, seriously, I'd be happy with half of it. And, I just said, Sten, you haven't changed a bit. But, he's we are very much aware of the Thomas Johnson Bridge. As I mentioned, there's $1 billion of new monies for highways. So obviously it would take nearly all that funding for the Thomas Johnson Bridge. I'm not sure that is how the legislature will want me to spend that money.
Right. I don't think you should take that in cash and buy anything. There's a lot of different things you can do to jumpstart that project if that's something that the state views as a priority. Of course, Congressman Hoyer works in a place with their own printing presses and central bank. So if he wants to help with more money, he can.
Well,
do that.
and he did say that, Mr. Chairman. He did say that he was there are, I believe, other talks of other funding coming in the future, some of it being specifically to bridges, especially if they have a national or regional interest. And so he is going to be working hard to get money for that Thomas Johnson Bridge. That's what he said to me last week. So we'll work together on that, of course.
Great. The next category, this is should be a quick one. It's page TSO3 of the CTP, which is the Kimball and Fears Bikeways program. When you look at the out years of that program in FY26 and FY27, there are some big old zeros shown there for that program. And I just wanted to see if it was the intention of the department not to fund that program in the out years.
Yes.
Let me get Heather to answer that because she does our CTP for us, and I know she's on top of that. I don't have the CTP in front of me, so I can't.
Yeah, no, I know what you're referring to. And for the record, Heather Murphy, I'm the director for the Office of Planning and Capital Programming. Not only is the CTP produced in my office, but the Bikeways program is run out of my office. It is definitely our intent to continue to facilitate that grant program. What we've been doing is funding the $3.8 million that had been discussed. Every year we allocate that money into that next year. And then that it is one of those programs where it is all dependent on the locals that receive it as to how well we spend it and what that allocation is. So we look at holding off on adding money into the out years until we know how it needs to be spent. There's a difference between what we allocate and give out in grants and how that money is spent. It's never spent in the same year that it's allocated. So you'll see there's a $3.8 million amount in that out year that will be reprogrammed once we get grants actually given out this next year and we know when that spending will occur.
Thank you. You know, there's a huge interest among legislators. Actually, Delegate Beitzel's brought this up as well for funding for bikeways and trails and other sort of alternative modes. So appreciate that program will continue in a way not necessarily reflected in the current CTP. My last set of questions, unless any of my colleagues have questions. Anybody else? Okay. It's about the toll lane P3. So, Mr. Secretary, I don't know if you want to address these or Mr. Folden, but first want to get an update on timing. Obviously, the analysis had Steve's view on what the current timing was, but just wanted to see if that's what the department was still anticipating in terms of when the final EIS and the record of decision would come out and the section agreement, and then groundbreaking, what the sort of updated schedule was there.
Sure. So far, yeah, the timing that Steve had mentioned is what we're slated to do right now. Some of that depends on the NEPA process with the federal government and when we get answers or they could create different timelines for us. So that could be a change, but right now we're sticking with the current timeline as stated.
Okay, and I can flip it open, but either for Mr. Secretary or Jeff, that's a BPW approval when under that timeline for the section agreement?
I believe it's in the fall, around the September timeframe.
Okay. And then the anticipation, I assume, would be, groundbreaking the next day, if not the next hour after that happens?
That's not up to me. That's up to the governor. I work with, I might lose my job if I get ahead of him. So I gotta wait for his announcement, not mine.
Right. Okay. And then on the outlines of the plan, I just want to make sure that I still understand that on 270, the plan is to turn one of the existing HOV lanes in each direction, which are, currently free during the non-peak rush hour in that direction, into toll lanes, as well as build an additional toll lane. Is that still the plan?
Correct.
I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary?
I said, yes, that is correct. I'm sorry.
Great. No, thank you. And I've heard a lot lately about the changes in the plan that were made to sort of reduce the footprint and I guess delay the top side of the Beltway, the eastern part of the Beltway. It has different names as being the reason that there'll be bottlenecks. So I just wanted to make sure I sort of understood that a little bit more, because my recollection is when this plan was announced, there was always going to be a section on the Beltway in Prince George's County before it hits the Wilson Bridge that wasn't going to be expanded. So you're always going to have a narrowing there in Prince George's before the Wilson Bridge. I think it's around I-5. I don't have my map in front of me.
Yeah, well, as you know, Mr. Chairman, that this project has taken a lot of different turns, and mostly through community input. As you're aware, the program was much larger when it was first announced, and through community input, they didn't want certain parts and did want other parts that we agreed to. And so it's much different project today than it was in yesteryear. And we'll be glad to go over that with you line by line, if you like, and explain the entire process where we are today. But we probably can't do it now because I don't even have my maps in front of me. So
yeah, I don't have my maps in front of me either. I think Jeff has them memorized though. So I'm going to try one more time before any of the turns that you were just talking about, back when Secretary Ron called this the Sudafed project. The project always ended on, I guess what I'll call the bottom of the Beltway in Prince George's County, around I-5 before the Wilson Bridge. So there was a stretch between the Wilson Bridge and where the project was going to end on the Beltway. Am I remembering that wrong?
Right.
Okay. So there was always going to be a bottleneck somewhere, because
There's a bottleneck now.
Certainly, it's
Some
would call it more than certainly you would
Yeah.
call it more than a bottleneck. I just want to make sure that I'm remembering before the turns what things looked like. And on the 270 North piece, and this, I honestly, I can't remember quite as well before the turns. was it always the case that it was going to have it was because NEPA, the pre-NEPA is still going on the north of 370 piece, right? So there was always going to be a narrowing of lanes at 270 when you hit 370 and go north of there, right? Even before any community input was taken, that was always going to be sort of a latter stage, right?
So if my memory serves me correctly, we had done some of the NEPA work prior, and some of the NEPA work had been done prior in these different parts of the Beltway, but not up in that area. So that part always was coming later. So we have agreed to also do that portion of the highway. And so, you know, that's something that when we looked at what we could start moving immediately, that was the other portions that we're talking about. And then we added that portion on because it couldn't be rolled into the entire project because of the NEPA process.
Got it. So just to wrap up this piece, there were always going to be narrowed bottlenecks, even if we adopted the original Pete Ron plan without any community input, without any legislative input, without any further discussion.
Well, actually, like I mentioned, right now, the whole thing's a bottleneck, if you like. And you know, Maryland has this all throughout its system where it goes from 4 lanes to 3 in many cases. You see that on 95, you see that on 495, you see it on 695. You see that all over the state. Now, why that was done a long time ago, I'm not really sure. But I do know that we have expanded much of that. We expanded on we have an expansion program on 95 right now. We do want to expand 495, the project you talk about now. We expanded on 695 where we took the shoulders and we're allowing them to be lanes. So we're trying, and we did it on 95 just prior to the tunnel. Before we did the 895 work, we expanded 95 to 4 lanes where it was a bottleneck prior to this administration. Where it went from 4 lanes to 3 lanes and back into 4 lanes. So there's bottlenecks all over, and we've been trying to do our best. Oh, and the Severn River Bridge is another one where we alleviated the bottleneck that was there for decades and opened that up to more traffic volume. So, I mean, the Hogan administration, I think, has done a really good job of trying to identify these bottlenecks and fix them. But if you're asking us to fix every single one all at once, that's just not.
No. In fact, In fact, you've actually MDOT, not necessarily you or this administration, has had either 1 or 2 previous bites at expanding 270, depending on how you count it. So you've actually already dealt with the bottlenecks there twice before and are coming back to do it again. But I was just trying to understand. You know, I'd actually heard myself be blamed for a few bottlenecks that are going to be created in the future. And I just wanted to understand if we had put the Pete Ron plan in whole cloth, would there have been bottlenecks? And for the reasons you just said, you can't build everything everywhere all the time for a lot of reasons. There would have been.
So the 270 project you're talking about is that was a temporary project because there was so significant of a traffic problem there that you mentioned, and Pete Ron decided he was going to do a temporary fix and do the metered ramps and all that kind of stuff while this long-term plan was being implemented, because we knew that this was going to take many, many years to implement. So he wanted to get a quick fix first to alleviate some of the traffic while we're waiting on the long-term plan. So I think it was a
thank you, Mr. Secretary. As long as we're going through history, I'll just remind you that even earlier than that, back in the early 90s when I was growing up, right there off 270, it was expanded then as well with multiple new lanes. So that's why I said it's either the first or second, depending on how you count.
Sure.
So I'm treating the congestion mitigation program as maybe that's a roadway expansion, kind of borderline. There was definitely a roadway expansion in the late 80s, early 90s on 270 south of Gaithersburg, the part that you're looking at again right now. A few more relatively quick hits on this one. Just want to make sure that there is still the intention that the American Legion Bridge will have its own separated bike pedestrian path when it's rebuilt.
It's the plan because both sides of that bridge have trails and bike paths on each side of it. Correct.
Okay. And given some other history that you're very aware of, can you give me any additional comfort around that topic?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, there's another bridge being rebuilt in the state of Maryland right now where this has been quite controversial. And I
Oh,
just want comfort and assurance
sure.
that that what you just told me is going to hold up.
Sure. Okay. Well, I can assure you this way. So when I was Deputy Secretary in the Ehrlich administration, we built the first span of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And we put a separated bike and pedestrian path on that bridge. So I can assure you that we did that. Now, I can also assure you that we're going to do it in on bridges where it makes sense. Like the American Legion Bridge. I can't speak to the Bay Bridge because we're going to a possible tier 2 study. And so I'm not supposed to, in my position, say.
Let me just tell you, I do not want to ride a bike across the Bay Bridge, but that may just be.
I don't need, I'm too old to ride a bike across the Bay Bridge, but I don't need it. But I'm saying there's there's trails and paths on each side of that bridge. The nice Middleton Bridge, that you're speaking about now, did not have those accommodations. There were not bike programs. There were not bike paths. If you look at 301, there's no bike facilities to that bridge. And in Virginia, of course, there is not either. So the way this administration has taken this on is we did put it in the RFP. Where it makes sense, we do it. But when that bid came back, it came back at $64 million for a 1.3 mile bike path on a bridge with no connection on either side of the bridge for bike path. So in that case, the board made a decision because we just talked about expansion and expansion programs on bottlenecks. On 95, we had a terrible bottleneck where it went from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. There were a lot of fatalities, a lot of injuries to people, and hundreds of thousands of people going to 95 per day. So that project to expand that to 4 lanes all the way through cost about $60 million, almost the same amount as a 1.3 mile bike path on a bridge with no connecting bike paths on either side. So I think most reasonable people would agree that in a finite budget where the budget monies are not, as you mentioned, we can't print money. It's not expansive, that we have to put our funding in the priority areas. And I think saving lives, reducing injuries on 95 with 100,000 people was a much better expenditure by the board than a 1.3 mile bike path with a population of about 10,000 on each side with no connection.
So sorry, Mr. Secretary, sorry to interrupt, but you don't have the section agreement on the American Legion Bridge yet either, but you've represented here that, you are confident that that section agreement is going to preserve the separated bike and pedestrian path on the American Legion Bridge that's been promised.
Yeah, I am. As a matter of fact, when I spoke to FHWA the other day, the deputy administrator, we talked about that.
Great. Thank you. On a similar topic, and again, this may be one for Mr. Folden or you, Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure. It looks to me like on the Virginia side, well, you all have been involved in the transit study with Virginia about sort of running, bus service over the American Legion Bridge. It actually looked to me that on the Virginia side, that some of their P3 money would actually go into the operations of those buses, which I viewed as a real positive thing. I know we're going to take our toll money for some other purposes. I'll talk about that in a second. But did I read that correctly? That part of the Virginia toll revenue would go towards the actual operations of buses across the American Legion Bridge. I know that the states have to sort of agree on what the service would be, but
yeah, I might have to point to Jeff Folden on that one, but I think we're still in negotiations on that. I'm not sure anything's in written form at this point, but Jeff, do you have something to add there?
And Jeff, just for context, I look at their PowerPoint decks the way I look at yours. So I just saw it on a Virginia side PowerPoint deck. So that's what's making me ask the question.
Yeah, Delegate, I can answer that as best I can. So Jeff Folden, for the record, Maryland Department of Transportation State Highway, Director of the 495-270 P3 office. VDOT, as part of their 495 Next project, is committed, I believe it starts at $2.2 million a year over the operating term toward transit. So the intent is that would operate interstate transit between Maryland and Virginia. At this time, Maryland has committed $300 million over the operating term for transit improvements. So we've already made a commitment. We are continuing discussions with Virginia upon any additional commitments for that interstate transit between the states.
So that actually segues nicely into my next question, if I may, which is on that existing transit commitment, because the transit commitment that you all have made is not for that interstate service, right? Or is it? I mean, isn't that for the like Montgomery County program? I think it's MTA 54 is the placeholder in the CTP now, or?
I mean, that's correct. We've made the $300 million over the operating term would go to Montgomery County transit priorities. So they have the ability to use that as they see needed, but it's transit over the operating term. So we would not start those contributions until after it's in operations, and they would be annually.
Right, but what Virginia is looking at is theirs is actually targeted towards that interstate service, whereas Montgomery County's may not be. Is that?
Unless Montgomery County wanted to use it for the interstate service, you're correct.
Okay. And then that does bring me to the page MTA 54, which is I think a new addition from the draft CTP to the final, which is kind of that placeholder for the Montgomery County program. So I just wanted to see if there was an update on how the discussions with the county was going. I know there was ongoing discussion of identifying what the particular project would be and allocating some money from the sort of first payment. I can't remember the acronym, it might be DRF, but it's been a while since I looked at it. I don't know, Mr. Secretary or Mr. Folden, who the right person to ask, but how those discussions are going to formalize that arrangement and sort of pick the project.
I probably have to kick that back to Jeff. I don't think they're quite formalized yet, but Jeff, you have?
No, we're for the $60 million that's being allocated for high priority transit projects in Montgomery County. We're working with the county council, or a representative, Glenn Orland, the county DOT representative, and we're looking at to get some representatives from Gaithersburg and Rockville to pick what project or projects that would go to. But I do understand that the county executive may have put that in his CIP already as a recommendation. But we're trying to form a work group between these different partners to come up with the right solution.
I think I saw a letter from the council to the prior secretary in early January, and I think actually the prior secretary sent a response before going to sunnier weather.
That's correct.
So great. Anybody else but me have questions? Because I've actually exhausted myself. So. Okay, well, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Folden and the rest of the team, appreciate you all being here. Obviously, we'll see most of you for your individual modal unit hearings as well, but really appreciate your participation today. And with that, Ken, unless I'm forgetting anything, I think we're wrapped up, right, Ken?
All right, you are all good, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. We are adjourned. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.